everybody, how's it going? Thanks for joining me this afternoon. I've got a great stream with a great guest that I think you're really going to enjoy. Before we get started today, I just want to remind you that if you like what we do around here and you want to support the show and the Blaze in general for making the show possible, you can go ahead and pick up some merch at shopblazemedia.com. They've got Trump and Vance merch. They've got merch from all the different hosts. I'm working with a designer right now to get Auron MacIntyre show merch in the store. And of course, they've got the Blaze Classic Collection and the Blaze Media Collection. So again, if you'd like to support us, you can head to shopblazemedia.com and enter the code BLAZE10 to get 10% off your order today. Joining me today to talk about our topic is one of my favorite guests, Jay Burden. He's got a great interview show, and it's on YouTube and podcast platforms. Jay, thanks for joining me, man.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on, Auron. I know it's been a while since we've spoken, but I always look forward to coming on your show and speaking with you.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, you've broken out all over the place. You've been on Andrew Klavan. You're basically, you've gotten a little too big for the Auron MacIntyre show at this point. I understand, but I appreciate you coming back.
I'll deign to show up. It is convenient to me. I might. No, but in all seriousness, Auron, I really do enjoy your show. I'm a regular listener, and so it's fun to call in.
Absolutely. Well, today we are talking about crime, specifically crime statistics. There was a small snafu in the reporting of crime statistics recently that kind of came up. Obviously the FBI famously has their crime report that comes out every year, letting people know where we're at in a country, who's committing crimes, where it's being committed, what kind of crimes are being committed. Is it going up? Is it going down? And the crime report from 2022 came out in 2023 in September. And at that point, it revealed that crime had gone down in the United States by about 2%. I think it was 2.1%. And this was very suspicious for anyone who has, eyeballs, because it seemed to many of us that actually crime had gone up quite a bit. It was very evident that, you only have your anecdotal evidence to some degree, but it's not just the social media feed. You can walk around your neighborhoods and realize they feel less safe. Fewer people are willing to let their kids go out, ride their bikes, these kind of things. Women are less likely to go out at night. This kind of problem. And so that statistic really clashed with reality, but they kept repeating it over and over again. You even had government officials like Pete Buttigieg come out and say, crime is down. Isn't this great? It's fantastic. And even to the point where we had these debates where Kamala Harris and Donald Trump are debating, and the moderators would jump in and fact check and tell Donald Trump, oh no, crime is actually down whenever he's pointing things out. Well, after the debates and after early voting had already started, it turns out that a year later at this point, over a year later, the FBI made a mistake, a whoopsie. And it turns out that crime is not down 2.1%. It's actually up 4.6%. And that's a pretty huge statistical error to say actually crime went down a minor amount to actually crime went up a substantial amount. And we just happened to calculate it incorrectly. And we just happened to not fix that error until, all of the political convenience of spreading the idea that crime had gone down had kind of been spent. And so I think a lot of people were raising quite the eyebrow because this wasn't even done as some kind of correction where they announced, oh, we made a big mistake. Sorry about this huge error. It was a stealth edit. It was only picked up later on by people after the fact. They didn't even bother to put out some kind of press release saying, whoops, I guess we completely got this one wrong.
Well, definitely, right? You've seen a similar story with economic data, right? Particularly, what is the unemployment rate? How many jobs are being created? Which is just magically, and it really is, from a statistical perspective, improbable that they would keep making wrong guesses by roughly the same amount, month over month over month, and then later have to go back and correct them, right? This isn't really, at this point, serious data. Right. It's very clear that people have their fingerprints or their fingers inside of it and they're messing with it. Right. They want it to tell a certain story. And the thing that it brings to my mind, right, is the concept of Soviet science. Right. Like if I describe something to you as, well, is he a biologist? And I said, well, he was a Soviet biologist, right? The implication, yes, he may have been, but he was part of a political system with political objectives, and so that colors his work. Effectively, we're seeing the exact same thing, right? America is fast becoming a banana republic, right? Where the sort of numbers you see the government produce have less and less of any relation to reality, right? It's like something you would see in the Soviet Union, right? Like we have more TVs produced here than ever. Now you don't have one, and no one has one, but we make lots of them. The economy's going great, right? Where it's purely a political signal. And what we've seen with both unemployment and now with crime is very much that, right? There needed to be proof for the idea that crime went down. And so that proof was created, regardless of anything actually done. And what's especially interesting is that even within that, the actual way the FBI gathers data has changed. And that's something that you might know, Auron, but they won't tell you that, right? They will never inform you that all of a sudden we changed what size ruler we're using. Again, it's another way to manipulate the outcomes of these procedures.
Yeah, and in a society that has this much scale, the collection of data is supposed to give us an indication of reality. And that's really important because we have moved beyond the size of a civilization that any one person or group of people can really grasp. We're well beyond Dunbar's number when it comes to the people we interact with. Everyone is kind of abstracted behind screens. We rely heavily on the institutions in our society to kind of give us feedback on how the world is going. Now, we're both Thomas Carlyle fans, so we know the danger of this. The condition of England question cannot be answered on spreadsheets or ultimately with data. And this is a really good example of why this way of understanding the world is very dangerous, because as you point out, the regime has a narrative, and whether that narrative is true or not, it needs to be proven. And the only way we prove narratives now, the only acceptable epistemological basis, is this scientific, accumulation of statistical information. That is supposed to be the way in which we verify our reality, even though we can't actually, observe it in a very real sense outside of our own spheres. And so as someone who worked in the public education system for a long time, I'm extremely aware of the degree to which this data gets baked or gets cooked, even just at the ground level. I'm not even talking about what happens in Washington, D.C. in those bureaus, but what happens just in the individual units of data collection. When I worked in schools, we were constantly doctoring grades. We were lying about student progress. We were redefining what it meant to be proficient in things, to acceptable thresholds, in order to get the data, to massage the data significantly and produce the desired outcomes. And again, this is just at like the school and district level, not at the Department of Education. The same thing is true when it comes to the FBI. As you point out, the way that they collect data has changed. Yes, that many large cities at this point aren't even participating in the data collection process because it has changed so radically. So that in and of itself skews the data. But when you look at a large number of cities, they are also going through this process where they are losing police officers. They are not able to respond to many incidents. So unless it's an active violent crime, unless you are literally being stabbed at the moment, they don't send officers out to take reports in many cases. So unless you are sitting in line for hours at the police station after the fact, making sure that your case is logged, then the data just doesn't appear. So it's not just a malicious changing of the data at the federal level, though I believe there's plenty of evidence to say that's exactly happening, but it's also a failure that cascades all the way down the chain of responsibility to local areas that are just not putting the resources towards accurately recording crime data, because that would reveal a trend they don't want publicized.
Well, exactly, right. And I think a lot of conservatives have a problem, right, where they look at the stated purpose of an institution as the effective purpose of the institution. And they're not wrong, right? In an ideal world, the purpose of the police would be to stop crime, right? That's why we pay them, right? But the problem is that's not the case currently. They very clearly don't exist. And I'm not making, any sort of implication about a specific officer or anything like that. But, when we look at law enforcement in general, right, federal level law enforcement, it very clearly does not exist to make you safer, right? So in this case, the FBI, right, federal law enforcement, what are they doing? Are they telling us what we actually need to know, which is, hey, crime is up. Like, we need to take steps to address it. Or are they kneeling to their real masters, right, the political elite, and saying, no, crime's down. Everything's going fine, guys. Don't believe your lying eyes. And similarly, right, we see this diversion, right, between the stated purpose and what, actually is produced in effect. And, not to get too chin stroking here, but I think that classical bit of wisdom, by their fruits you shall know them, right? Look at what they do, not at what they say. And again, like I said, that's in no way intended to impugn the honor of any individual officer, right? There are many police officers who do a great job. But when we're talking systemically, when we're looking this at the broadest possible level, we can identify that there is a problem. And that problem is not being addressed because it's politically inconvenient.
Yeah, I think it's also important to be able to take a look at what might be some more accurate data. So let me bring this up real quick, because John Lott, who is somebody who's done a lot of great work on, of course, crime statistics. He's famous for his advocacy when it comes to gun ownership and what the truth about gun ownership is. But he wrote a fantastic article for Real Clear Politics explaining this phenomenon. And one of the things that he pointed out was how broken the FBI's collection of statistics ultimately was. And so he suggested that a much better indicator that has been going on for a long time, one that has been available to us, is the National Crime Victimization Survey. And the difference between this and the FBI's collection method is that the FBI is ultimately aggregating statistics that have been brought in by the individual departments and the regions. So whatever the official numbers are being brought in by different sheriff's offices and investigators and all these different things, that is then being aggregated into the FBI crime statistics. But again, if the local level breaks down, if the reporting at the local level breaks down, even if there isn't a malicious intent at the top, which I absolutely believe there is, you're still going to get heavily skewed statistics. And so if we take a look at this crime report, this one is done differently. Rather than taking the aggregated data across all these local reporters, what it does is it takes a couple hundred people and surveys them every year. And when it does that, it comes up with very different statistics, because it's not just taking the officially reported crime, but it's taking people who perhaps did not go out and report that crime, did not actually file an official police report or have that report properly logged through them and through the department and into the FBI. But instead, it is surveying the entirety of that group and saying, have you experienced any of this type of crime during this year? And so for the 2020 data set, which is the same that the FBI was pulling from, we see instead of a 4.5 increase in violent crime, which is what they reported after they stealth adjusted it, after the debates and after voting started, instead of 4.5%, we actually see a jaw-dropping 29.1%. And if we stretch that out, not just for that 1 year, but the entirety of the Biden-Harris administration, we actually see a staggering 55.4% increase in crime. You can look at the graph that's been assembled here from that data, and you can see that the Trump numbers are in orange, and they go down on everything except rape. The total violent crime goes down, robbery goes down, aggravated assault goes down, rape is the one that goes up there 9%. When we look at the Harris and Biden data, we see 55% total crime over that time, 42% in rape, 63% in robbery, 55% in aggravated assault. Now, this seems really high, but if you look and you feel like which of these data collections of data actually feels like it accurately represents the amount of crime that we are seeing in our neighborhoods around us, these kind of things, this feels far more accurate. Ultimately, though, again, either way, we're still trying to trust these statistics that are being brought together by organizations that we ultimately may not have a high degree of trust in.
Well, right. And again, to me, it all comes back down to that, like, well, what do you see? Look, like it's very possible to be deceived, right? You could just live in a rough area. But the fact that, and I'm sure other people share this, right, that I have friends and contacts all across the US and everyone is reporting the same thing. There is an air of mass lawlessness. It's, what Sam Francis would refer to as a narco tyranny, where there's the feeling that, if I, as a normal person, steps out of line, I'm very likely to be dealt with harshly. But for instance, in the case of auto theft, any one of these crimes, or what we're seeing in Chicago with gangland shootings being charged as mutual combat, right? Like two guys agreed to a bar fight. Is that for the criminal underclass of America, right? The people who commit the vast majority of these violent crimes, the state is not interested in intervening, right? It is simply not a problem for them, in the same way that it's a problem for the people who actually live here, right? You and I are on.
And so ultimately we see, like you said, that they're leaving the concerns of the average person behind. They don't care how crime is actually manifesting itself in your neighborhood. And then they kind of post this lackadaisical attitude as if it's a triumph. They say, oh, well, we can't be bothered to respond to your calls anymore. We can't be bothered to chase us down. I have several friends, just again, anecdotally in my personal life, who have had property crimes perpetrated against them. And even though we have relatively good law enforcement comparatively to the rest of the country in my area, they still get basically, well, there's just no way we're actually going to bother to chase that down. Yeah, you may have lost thousands of dollars in property, but we're just not going to, bother to even send a police officer out to check that out or record that in any way. And so, we get this completely indifferent attitude to the suffering of the average person, the condition in which most Americans are actually living. And then that is reported as a triumph. Well, we couldn't be bothered to report the crimes against you. So look, we ended up having less crime. Isn't this amazing? Isn't Kamala Harris doing a fantastic job? We couldn't send an officer out to check out the fact that you were devastated by this crime. And now we're going to count that as some kind of positive achievement that we manifested in the lives of the people. And again, when you are abstracting this data across so many different regions of the country, people have to trust it to some degree in order to have an accurate picture of what the world looks like. And this is really ultimately what our leaders are terrified of when we hear about misinformation and disinformation and Trump and the Republicans attacking science and undermining trust in institutions. What they really mean is that these people are just pointing out what is obvious, so that all of these institutions, and you already pointed out Bureau of Labor Statistics, over reporting, the number of jobs by 800,000, on your way to 1 million jobs that they functionally lied about just to cook their statistics. When we have the Department of Health, obviously cooking everything when it came to the pandemic, when we have the, our crime reports completely skewed, people are increasingly recognizing that at every domain, our institutions are failing. And this means that the kind of unified perception of the state of the nation that the regime relied on in order to kind of use this as a fulcrum to create the politics that they wanted, that is failing. And they are recognizing this and they are panicking in this, right? Because if they no longer have this unified understanding of we produce the data, you believe the data, and then we act on that data and that justifies our political action, then they end up in a situation where there's just this completely fractured reality. And again, this is John Kerry just complained about this at a WEF summit of all places. The First Amendment makes it really hard for us to chase down all of these places that hand out information we don't like and stamp them out. He literally said beat them down with a hammer, and so they are fully aware of the crisis, though they are blaming the people who are accurately reporting the experiences they have, rather than saying, well, maybe we shouldn't manipulate things so badly. And that's really the most terrifying thing, is rather than having any level of introspection, this is what like our mutual friend academic agent would say, is like, eventually power will correct this, right? Like eventually power will look at this and say, okay, our manipulation of these things is costing us too much. our continued efforts at manipulating reality are becoming too apparent. And if we want to retain some level of credibility, if we want to be able to hold power through our previous political formula, then we have to dial this back. Like, right? Like, we're going to manipulate data. Like, that's going to happen. We're going to manipulate reality. That's how we got into power. But we have to be a little more cautious. We have to use a little more finesse, a little more prudence in the way in which we deploy this power. We can't just throw it out and constantly completely contradict reality and expect people to kind of go along with it. But instead, they have only leaned into this process, which is why I'm pretty sure AA is going to owe me a cigar, but is also why I'm pretty sure that we are going to have a more serious problem when it comes to social cohesion in the United States, because I don't see these people making any corrections to their strategy.
Well, that actually brings up a very important question, right? Which is basically, what is the correct way to rule? Like, what can you expect of your rulers? Because, look, we're all hardened political realists here. We realize that at least on Earth, actually in heaven as well, you're never going to get out of that, right? Someone is going to be in charge. Anarchism does not work. So, right, we accept that premise. Someone is going to be in charge. Well, it seems pretty clear, right, that there are better and worse people to be in charge, better and worse systems. So what makes a good one? Well, at a very, very basic level, I'm talking Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? It's security, right? The monopoly on violence, if you will. Basically, can you keep your people safe? So forgive me a bit of digression on feudalism, right? Well, how did feudalism start? Well, basically, the giant empire went away. There were marauding bands of barbarians running around, and everyone kind of looked to themselves and said, all right, I guess you're really good at fighting, so you're in charge now. Right. And that's a massive oversimplification. But from that, right, that pure need from security, a society arose. Right. That guy eventually became, kind of a warlord, then a baron, then a duke, then a king. And it became, right, a complicated nation state, right, from that very, very simple monopoly on violence. Right. Who is the guy that keeps us safe? And so right now we're in a situation where we are allegedly the most powerful country in the world. Right. We have a massive military, better technology than anyone. And we can't stop property crime, right? A problem that the Victorians managed to solve,
Yeah. Well, and the Atlantic actually just had a headline out like the shoplifting crisis is real, which is hilarious because they've been lying about it for many years. It's the classic gaslighting. It's not happening. It's not happening. It's not happening. Actually, of course, it was happening the whole time, and now we have to admit it. But not only do they finally admit it, but then their follow up is no one knows how to solve it, right? But of course, as you point out, the Victorians knew how to solve it. Everybody knows how to solve this. The Bible told you how to solve this, right? This is not new. Bukele even put, his report was, I know, because he has recently demonstrated exactly how you solve this problem. Everyone knows how to solve crime. This is not a mystery. We don't need new technology. We don't need new training. We don't need, new bills passed. We just need to apply the thing that everyone knows works. But we have literally labeled that which maintains socialism racist and fascist. And and it's like, okay, how long can you play that stupid game before you guys just win the stupid prize? Like, how long can you label basic social maintenance, the basic, keeping down property crime? How long can you label that racist and fascist before someone's like, you know what? I would actually just prefer my stuff not get stolen and I not get stabbed. So maybe if that's the only thing you're going to label as capable of maintaining civil order, then maybe that doesn't sound so bad.
Well, definitely, right? And really that question of are you willing to do violence, right, is the fundamental question of sovereignty, right? When we talk about something like the will to power, that's what we're saying. Are you willing to fight for it? And I'm not talking on an individual level, I'm talking on the level of nations. But fundamentally, the question of who is in charge is, well, who's willing to fight for it, right? Because, I mean, you see when two countries get into a disagreement, if it, goes to the most extreme, it becomes a war, right? Where they basically said, like, you'll take it off my cold, dead hands, right? That's the most extreme version of it. But fundamentally, that is the same desire, as George Sorel would say, that enables the state to say, no, you're not allowed to do that. You go straight to jail. Or in a medieval context, maybe you go somewhere else. But point is, right, the idea is that ability, that will to say, no, there is order here, is the same will to say, I am in charge of this country. You can't make me leave. That is, again, I'm going to say it again and again, the monopoly on violence, right? That is what true authority looks like. And so we're in a situation, right, where our elites are both from one perspective, frantically grabbing onto sovereignty, right? They want to be in charge. They want to be in charge, but they don't want to rule, right? They don't want to accept the responsibility for producing order. And so to me, it seems very much like, we have people in charge, but we don't have a sovereign, right? We don't have someone who is saying, like Bukele, I am in charge. This is my country, and the buck stops with me. I mean, look, like I'm not the, I'm not gonna just sit here and turn this into a digression about, the American political election. But does literally anyone, especially now, think Joe Biden is in charge?
Right.
Like, very clearly he's not. But who is? That's a very difficult question to ask. And when you're in a situation where you have mass disorder, if you could say, well, he's in charge and he's not producing order, well, then it's very clear who's responsible, who's at fault. Like if El Salvador became what El Salvador was 10 years ago, well, very clearly that's Bukele's fault. So we get someone else. But in this situation, right, where we do have, whether you want to call it a deep state and entrenched bureaucracy, this kind of like diffuse network of power, it's very difficult to say whose fault this is. And so you have, again, like a situation where there is no one who is saying, there will be order here. I will there to be order, effectively.
Well, I want to transition to a discussion on body cams because there's some shocking body cam footage that came out the last few weeks or in the last week, and that been making the rounds everywhere, and it's created quite a bit of controversy. Certainly dovetails nicely into our discussion on crime. But before we do that, guys, let me tell you a little bit about today's sponsor. Hey guys, if you're looking to break into the world of fully remote jobs, I want you to listen closely. There's a new job stacking program focused solely on how to land remote jobs, even if you don't have any remote work experience. The new Remote Work Mastery program is designed to get you to successfully implement the strategies that allow you to leverage your current skill set, whatever that happens to be, into a fully remote role. No need to learn any new complicated skills like coding or finance. This is all centered around what you already have experience with. There are a lot more remote job opportunities in today's marketplace that go beyond the typical IT job set. The job stacking team will walk you through the entire process of identifying suitable remote positions that adjust to your experience, optimizing your resume, and acing your job interview so that you're set up for success in the world of remote work. So if landing a remote job is something that you're interested in, go to jobstacking.com/masterremote and schedule a call with Rolf today. All right, guys. So today we're also going to talk about this shooting, officer-involved shooting of Sydney Wilson. Now, this is another one of those, I can't believe that, a black woman has been shot by a police officer. This is terrible. This is racism. This is oppression. I can't show you the footage on YouTube, I'm pretty sure, because that's gonna violate some of their terms of service. But I brought up the article here just so you could see some of the stills really quickly. But basically what happened is there was a wellness check called in on this individual. Now, the officer who responded is a guy named Peter Liu. He had been through the training to respond to mental health situations. So a lot of people say, oh, well, if they just send a mental health professional, blah, blah, blah. Garbage, of course, but but anyway, he had been through the training involved in this. And when he knocked on the door, this woman who herself used to be a college basketball player. In fact, her death was mourned by the Georgetown women's basketball team. There's a post online, saying, oh, we can't believe we've lost her. What a tragedy. Well, it turns out that once we look at the body cam footage of this woman being shot, in reality, what happens is that the police officer knocks on the door and she immediately emerges with a knife. She comes lunging out of the room. Now, the officer the entire time is saying, back up, stop, do not advance, don't come forward. He makes it very clear that she needs to stop what she's doing, drop the knife. He backs up before, he's not shooting immediately, even though she's wielding the knife, she's lunging towards him. He shows incredible restraint, but eventually she gets close enough to actually, here's her emerging from the door with the knife. She's coming down the hallway again with the knife. Eventually she gets close enough to actually cut the man, as you can see here, multiple times on the face. In the body cam footage, you can literally see the blood dripping off of the man's face across his body cam as he's trying to call in the shooting here. But of course, unfortunately, he is forced to stop this woman. And the thing that is there's two things that are amazing about this. First, of course, the response was this man should have done something else. There should have been some other response, even once the body cam footage came out. But on top of this, we were the big push by criminal justice reform proponents was that we need body cams. We need body cams because this is going to reveal how racist cops are, how violent they are. This is going to show us the evidence that actually the police officers are constantly biased against people of color, this kind of thing. BLM, these kind of organizations were huge proponents of this. And what has happened in most cases is actually body cam footage has shown us that, police are relatively reasonable in these scenarios. Now, I'd like to make it clear before we dive into this that I don't think either of us, while both of us respect, honest officers, I have a particular respect, someone who grew up in military bases and around people who are constantly in harm's way. I have a particular respect for those willing to put themselves in harm's way, to deploy violence when necessary to protect their fellow citizens. But both of us also recognize that in many scenarios, especially given the current political climate, police are, we're not back the blue in all situations. Police are willing to follow, especially just think about the pandemic, the orders that police were willing to follow in those situations. It's not that police are just, these amazing guardians that are beyond reproach. I think it's entirely possible, and I think evidence will show this, that police are, brutalizing people in particular situations. But what we have seen from these body cam footages over and over again is that actually in many scenarios, the police are being as restrained as possible. And it shows us kind of the impossible situation that many of these officers are placed in, like this one. So it was just amazing because everyone thought that the body cam footage would show us all this, systemic racism or whatever. In reality, it shows us stuff like this, a crazed woman wielding a knife, desperately slashing an officer who's begging with her to stop. And only after he takes severe physical injury to himself does he actually deploy lethal force. And still, this guy gets labeled as a racist. The whole thing gets labeled as some kind of, new lynching in the incredibly racist America.
Well, and this is one of the things we can file under the heading of it literally doesn't matter. And not to say that it doesn't matter for us, but I'm saying that from the progressive point of view, the situation does not matter. It will be used to advance a political point. This is the most clear-cut instance possible. Both people involved in it are minorities, right? There's no white person around to be, the source of the white supremacy here. He knocked on the door respectfully. They had an interaction over and over again. He tries to tell her to put down the knife, stop doing what you're doing. She tried to stab him in the head, which is not like that. That's not a wounding strike, right? You're trying to stab someone in the face.
Right.
It's the most explicit, justified case of self-defense. But again, that doesn't matter because they don't really care. They don't care about this woman. They don't care about the man involved. What they want to use it as is a unit of political currency. It is useful for them. And again, right, it goes back to what we were saying about crime earlier, that crime does matter for people like us, right? If you're this woman's neighbor, you want her to be okay, but you want her to be dealt with, right? You don't want to live around a knife-wielding psychopath, right? It's almost so obvious you'd barely have to say it. And likewise, like this woman should not be in the type of situation where she is endangering herself and others. It would be better if this hadn't happened. But within the bounded rationality of the situation, the officer acted as he was supposed to, right, to protect other people and himself. And it was cheaply turned into a token to advance a political agenda, as we've seen any number of times.
Yeah, it really is the life that you're asking people to live, right? We should not have to live this way. The fact that someone in my area, I know they're unwell, I know they could be unstable, I know they could be violent. And if I call the police on this person, I could be the bad guy, I could be the racist. If the police responds and something terrible happens, then the police officer could be the wrong person. Everyone is being held accountable. Everyone else is being charged. Everyone else is being blamed, except the people perpetrating the crime, the people creating a situation in which everyone is feeling unsafe. And so fewer and fewer people report the crimes, as we've already pointed out when it came to the crime statistics. And more people are forced to live in this constant dread of people that they know are dangerous. So again, they don't want their children out. They don't want to, they don't want, to allow, their wives to go places because they are scared that there's just no safety. There's the racial the racial calculation is more important to society than the actual safety of the people involved. We can go right to Daniel Penny in New York and the fact that he is facing murder charges over the fact that he defended people from a crazed guy who was threatening to harm them. When that is how you treat people, that is how you create the men without chests. This is how you create a society of fear. This is how you create the anarcho tyranny, because people are terrified to, they know that law enforcement is not going to step up and protect them in many situations because, that I'm sure that officer is now facing some kind of, scrutiny just due to this act before the body camera footage came out. But on top of that, they can't take any self-defense action because we see what happens to a guy like Daniel Penny. And so we create a society in which women are unsafe, children are unsafe. And the hilarious thing is then, like, a lot of, for instance, single women who vote for Democrats say, well, I am unsafe. Why? Well, because of men, right? Rather than recognizing, actually, no, you're unsafe because you've cowed men and made it impossible for them to actually defend you. You've created a scenario where the racial calculus is more important than the protection, the safety of your neighborhood. And now you can't walk outside, and you're not blaming the government. You're not blaming the people who actually made that, the kind of the law of the land, the situation in which you live in. You're blaming, men in general, or people, or men in your life, rather than actually looking at the people involved. I want to bring this up just because, I don't normally want to just show replies to myself on Twitter, but this guy's reply went viral because it was so bad. So I had a tweet on this body cam, me just saying, what you actually get on body cam reveal. It ended up getting like, over 100,000 likes. And so this guy responded, and in his bio, it literally says like, communist, cat lover. It's everything you'd expect. But he says, this was racism and abuse. He had a gun and she didn't. She was clearly having a psychotic episode. People having psychotic episodes don't deserve to be murdered. So what he's basically saying here, there's really not even much, there's not really much of a veil over it, is saying if a black person wants to kill you, you have to die. If a person of color decides to commit a crime against you, it is your job to allow that crime to happen, up to and including your own murder. And if you take actions to stop that murder, or if you see someone who seems like they are a danger to themselves or others, and you call that in and someone responds, then they are racist. That is abuse. There is no scenario in which that is a reasonable response. Any self-defense, any attempt to avoid becoming a victim is itself a crime against the state. It is violating the taboo of racism.
Yeah, I mean, going back to what you said earlier, right? It's there's multiple ways to look at the impact of crime, right? The easiest is just, well, who gets hurt, right? The second order, right, is the economic impact, right? Oh, you got your property stolen, you weren't able to do something else. But when we're talking about the social impact, right? You were talking earlier, like, oh, I don't want to let my kids go outside. I'm forced to live with these, these violent people all the time. It completely destroys the kind of cohesive nature of a community. And on a whole nother level, right? If you have people who don't live around you saying, if you don't want to live like this, there's a moral failing with you, right? You should stand there and let yourself be stabbed in the face. It's like, well, and I'm not trying to be sensational here, but like, how do you have a conversation with that person? I don't really know what happens in Massachusetts. I don't want to go there. God willing, I never will again. But I really have no opinion on the kind of laws they have there, right? It's not anywhere near me. But this, this kind of like state religion that is very, very interested in what goes on where you live, right, is very interested in how crime is handled in your city, right, is basically going to say that, the kind of, and I'm going to use a leftist term here, right, the lived experience of the people who are there, right, who have to be, watch their their culture basically fray, due to this level of background violence. It's simply not a concern to them. I mean, again, like I said, I I don't want to just like reduce it to the pure, dollars and cents, right? The chart went up. That's bad. Because there's a very real human cost to this, right? It's difficult to quantify how many people didn't go out to dinner with their family because they were worried about getting mugged, or how many people, have you seen the photos from San Francisco, right? Of people putting signs on their window that says, don't break in. I don't have anything in here, right?
Right.
Take these kind of ridiculous precautions to avoid crime. And it's something that, again, in the richest country in the world, you wouldn't assume would be the case, right? There are countries significantly poorer than ours that don't have these problems. It is fundamentally a choice, right? Our elites have chosen for this to be the case, and they are choosing to still allow it.
Yeah, this really reflected itself in an interview that I played recently on the show, where JD Vance was speaking with that ABC host, and they're talking about the hostile takeover of apartment complexes in Aurora, Colorado. And they're on this misinformation thing. Oh, everything's a conspiracy. It's all right wingers blowing it out of proportion. That's kind of the only line they have left at this point. Sure, maybe they've given up on it's not happening at all. But well, it's not. You're being disproportionate. And she says, oh well, it's only a handful. The police. We talked to the police, and they said it's only a handful of apartment complexes, right? And they're trying to deal with it. And JD Vance stops her and says, do you hear yourself? Like, do you hear the words that you're saying? Like, we have a woman who is incredibly privileged. She is probably living in a very upscale neighborhood. She is never facing any of these obstacles, any of these problems. Her job is to get in front of the nation and, in theory, convey their concerns to their political leaders. And she gets up there and she looks people in the eye and says, well, you're just trying to cause hysteria because only a few apartment complexes are captured by Venezuelan gangs. Now, that's not true. It's a lie. But even if it wasn't, the fact that she would even phrase that as like, oh, well, only a few apartment complexes where Americans live have been completely captured by armed men from a foreign country. There's a word for when armed men from a foreign country capture parts of your country and make it impossible for the people who live there. That's called an invasion. That's conquest by any definition throughout history. But our elites are just like, well, that's not, it's only a few. It's just a handful. And this is their approach to everything, well, it's only a few apartment complexes. It's only a few deaths from, fentanyl-laced drugs. It's only a little human trafficking. It's only a few rapes or murders. Well, maybe we fudged the things a little bit. Like, this is the worst type of, like, your 5-year-old lying to you that we've ever seen. And yet this is supposed to be the way in which our elite class communicates the constant degradation of our society.
And to quote Anna Kasparian, they're better than you, right?
Right.
That's how they view it. They view themselves as this kind of like unassailable white, like ivory tower, right? They're better than everyone. They deserve to be at the top. And by their output, that's not showing, right? Very clearly, these people are not good at running a country. And one of the things that I think about a lot, right? Because you've seen this in kind of multiple kind of social changes over the last, let's just say, 50 years, right? Where oftentimes the consequences are delayed, right? You get this kind of sugar rush from changing something. Legalizing weed is a great example, right? Oh, there's all this money coming in, everything's going great. And then 4 or 5 years down the line, you start to see that, wait a minute, there were some consequences to doing that, right? Regardless of your opinions. And again, I think that basically what we're seeing is, the knock-on effect of the lawlessness of 2020, right? That whole complex, right, propelled Joe Biden to one of the greatest political victories of all time, right? More popular than Obama. A truly amazing politician. It worked, right? It did what it was needed for. And the problem is, right, those consequences, certainly some of them were easily apparent, especially if you lived in Kenosha, but that created a knock-on effect where immediately afterwards, there was a massive increase in traffic fatalities, murders, robberies, almost overnight, right? You can look into the sociology of this, but it's effectively a tabletop graph, right? We go up a massive amount one day to the other, which is very difficult to explain. And now that's compounded, right? We have a society where for 4 years, a large number of crimes have been decriminalized, have been normalized, right? I mentioned earlier Chicago, right? Chicago, the DA there has declined to prosecute a lot of gangland shootings, treating them not as crimes, but as mutual combat, right? Which is a legal term. I'm no lawyer, right? For if I say, Auron, I don't like your shirt, and you say, well, I don't like your shirt either. Let's take this outside. We get into a scuffle. The cops show up, and we both say, like, hey, look, yeah, this was mutual. No need to get the police involved. We'll go home, right? That's what that exists for. Not for gangbangers trading shots out of a busted out Nissan Altima, right? That is not the purpose for that law, right? Gangland stuff. But again, right, that has been normalized. That is acceptable, quote unquote. And those chickens are coming home to roost. And you see it not in the official data, at least the first time around. But when we get the actual count, we can see that those decisions do matter, right? This wasn't free. This wasn't free lunch. It wasn't a free choice. And really the desire, right, going back to what do we want in a good leader, is a leader whose interests are aligned with our own, right? Someone like Hoppe would write about, where he wants his country to do well, right? He wants his people to prosper. It's never perfect, right? I'm not, kind of pining after some philosopher king, but very clearly the people in charge of this country do not have our best interest at heart. If anything, they have the exact opposite.
Yeah, I think it's critical for people to understand that ultimately this is, as you point out, diminishing returns, right? Like, it gets the job done at the moment. It secures power when it needs to. Yep, you got Biden into office. Congratulations. But what did it cost you? You can pull this truck once, you can pull this trick twice, but eventually, when does it end? Now, there are some doomers who say this can just go on forever, that, the American people have no spine and there will never be any real consequence for this. But I think we are starting to see it. I think we really are socially manifesting. A few years ago, if a news organization challenged a Republican and said, you disagreed with an official source, therefore, you're some kind of crazy conspiracy theorist, that Republican would jump back in line. And that's because the Republicans are useless and garbage. But increasingly, there are people who are inside administrations, inside organizations, even inside the Republican Party itself, who are recognizing that this is a failing tactic, that they can't be cowed by this, that if they continue to worry more about what the media is labeling them than what people are actually seeing, that they're going to lose power in a real way. Some of them genuinely want change. Some of them are just reacting to incentives. But either way, I think there is a serious shift. Not enough. There are still far too many people in the GOP and even in the conservative movement more broadly that still, clamor for the respect of the New York Times or ABC or NBC or Harvard or whatever. But more and more politicians are realizing, leaders are realizing, that there is more to be gained by questioning the system and questioning its results and questioning the manipulation than there is by buying into it and maintaining the respectability of credible institutions, because there is no credibility in those institutions. They are trading on it. They are burning it as fast as they can. And so I think that is a positive direction. It's bad for the overall society because we rely on that institutional consensus to coordinate our vast bureaucratic managerial system. But it is good for those who recognize that system is ultimately harmful to the well-being of people, because, as you've pointed out repeatedly, they are actively ignoring that in the hopes of creating this data, manipulating this data, and compelling outcomes. But even our political leaders, even many of whom have been cowards in the past, are starting to recognize if they want a future, they have to be willing to question at some level what is coming out of these official sources.
Well, definitely. Right. And look, neither you nor I is particularly liberal, right, in the broadest sense of that word. But there is something to the idea of the consent of the governed, right? People have to think that their government is, at least in some way, legitimate. And if the government can't hold up its end of the deal, right, if it can't do the things that governments do, like at a very basic level provide security, it loses legitimacy. Okay, that doesn't matter immediately, right? Losing the mandate of heaven doesn't immediately kick you out of power. But the problem is, right, governments depend on a lot of soft power, right? How often in your life do you really interact with government force? Probably not that often. But, you assume that if I don't do what I'm supposed to, someone will come and get me, right? That is basically the game they play. And if they lose that respect, right? If people don't assume that they are, dangerous or capable or, worthy of respect, well, you get something like the government of Haiti, right? Where everyone basically just does whatever they want and the government is not a factor in their life, right? It doesn't matter to them. And I think that, I'm not trying to take this in a libertarian direction, not at all. But the problem is, in order to run a country, you need to be seen as, at least by a certain percentage of people, as legitimate and as being really in charge. I mean, look at, like the Russia-Ukraine situation. There are places where they're technically, legally still part of Ukraine, but Russians drove tanks through there. So it's like, well, does it matter if you're, another example, in Colorado, right? Technically part of the U.S., but a bunch of Venezuelan guys control the block with guns, right? Who's really in charge?
Right.
And so this loss of sovereignty, right? It's not purely theoretical. It does matter. And I think that, to your point, right, it's not good in the short term because I want to live in a good country. But as someone who despises this government, well, they're kind of doing it to themselves.
Yeah, I mean, at some point, maybe we'll get the Judge Dredd rollout. You just put the whole combo in there. You can.
Yeah, really.
The only way to actually police Mega City 1 is through that kind of justice. But as
it certainly can't make some of these Democrat cities worse.
Right? No, it would strictly be an upgrade from the current system. I don't. Well, while I may be joking about the creation of that bureau, I'm not joking about how it would be an improvement in the slightest.
It all depends on your definition of the term community policing. All right.
That's exactly right. All right, guys. Well, we're going to move over to the questions of the people. But before we do, Jay, where can people find your great work?
So sure, my primary output is the Jay Burden Show, which is, as Auron intimated, is an interview show, 2 episodes a week, and you can find that on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, anywhere you listen to podcasts. Again, thank you so much for having me on, Auron.
Of course, always a pleasure. Let's see here. Arthur says, progressives lobby to make body cams a requirement for years. Ironic how the cameras proved how insane a portion of society really is. Is reopening lunatic asylums a valid solution? Yeah, again, it's such a huge thing that it backfires, and I think that's a huge part of this reveal has been that we recognize that the system has its faults and problems, but ultimately we see kind of the nature of violence and the reality of it from the body cams more than we see any kind of systemic oppression of particular communities. Touching on the insane asylum thing, obviously this person was unwell in this particular situation that they were called because of a mental health issue. But I'd also like to make it clear that while we need a more robust way to deal with mental health, the idea that opening asylums kind of solves this problem in of itself is also an issue. Crime and insanity are not the same thing. Not that insane people don't commit crime and there isn't a problem with those that do, but the majority of our crime is not committed by people who are mentally unwell. The majority of our crime is committed by people who are malicious and bad. And that's something we should recognize, is that evil is real. Humans are flawed. And ultimately there is the 80% of our crime tends to be done by about 20% of criminals. So it's not just, lunatics that though obviously putting people in asylums who deserve to be in asylums would be an improvement.
Well, and that's a point for another time, right? But treating criminality as sort of a psychic illness, right? That's a very insidious change in how we view criminality. Again, complicated discussion for another time, but nonetheless, an interesting point.
Robert Weinsfield says, now we're Nazi adjacent. I'm telling the Talmudic Network. Kidding. Big fan of the Beaver King. Keep it up with the great pod work.
Well, thank you very much, Robert.
The aristocratic utensil. Two of my favorite people that keep me from losing what's left of my mind. Well, thank you for coming by, sir. I just realized you have your own YouTube channel, so I'm sure people can check
I
that
think
out.
he might be bigger than both of us,
Is
actually,
he?
if I'm not
Okay.
mistaken. Yeah, he's a friend of mine. I've had him on the show before, and he does a lot of viewership. So I recommend his stuff. It's if you like us, you'll like it, right?
Very nice. Flimplar with the beaver there, just respecting the beaver gang. Florida Henry says, first-hand knowledge. This data is very skewed by each department. Slow departments make up crime for funding, and busy departments are buried in paperwork and shed crime incidents. Yeah, precisely. Again, as someone, not direct law enforcement experience, but plenty of direct experience in government bureaucracy and the way in which data is manipulated, I agree 100%. It's very clear that this is manipulated. I want to make it clear the top is corrupt. Like the FBI is corrupt. The government is lying to you. All of these things are true. I just also want to make it clear that everyone along the chain is also incentivized to lie as well. So whatever the problem is at the top, and it is significant, as we can see in the differences in the crime data that we've already compared, but as bad as you think it is there, I assure you, it is much worse. Sorry about the black pill there, but Creeper Weirdo says, does the left, I think that's supposed to be, does the left trust the science anymore? Yeah, I mean, they trust that you will believe what they tell you is the science. I think that's the big thing. Perspicacious Heretic says, but Steven Pinker said everything was getting better. Yes. Up and to the right, up and to the right. You know what I love about Steven Pinker is he wrote a book about the blank slate and then completely ignored it. That right up there with Jonathan Haidt writing The Righteous Mind and then completely ignoring all of the conclusions of his own work.
Yeah, I mean, I'll put it this way. That argument might have been plausible 10 years ago, but I mean, I feel like I can just gesture outside and see that his arguments didn't pan out.
Yeah, one of those end of history. Oh no, did I freeze that in amber for people to see forever type scenarios? Flimpar says the leftist mob will always defend the evildoer from Barabbas to Wilson. There's no convincing them, only dismissing them. Yep, can't argue with that. Creeper Weirder says, friendly reminder the black pill is a suppository. Insert Dirty Harry quote here. Insert unfortunate choice of words. Torin McCabe says Biden is not in charge, but hypothetically, if we had a communist strongman leader, he could easily just delegate to our current admins, thus no change. Yeah, and I think, Torin, that's ultimately the point. For a lot of people, they look at someone like, Kamala Harris and, what is she going to change? Nothing, because Biden isn't in charge and she won't be in charge either. There's a lot of people on the right, a lot of Republican commentators, conservative commentators say, oh no, Harris is so much more dangerous. Maybe, but probably not. Like, is she stupid? Does she have bad principles? Yes, 100%. But are any of her convictions significant enough where she would override the people in charge to push down some very dangerous idea that she has? I significantly doubt that. She'll just do what she's told, and what she's going to be told is terrible enough. And then Creeper Weirdo says, who else is tired of criminals laughing in court? Yeah, that particularly heinous footage whenever you see that. All right, guys, we're going to go ahead and wrap this up. I once again want to thank Jay Burton for coming on. You should make sure to be watching all of his podcast and other content, reading his Substack when he puts those out. If it's your first time on this channel, make sure you subscribe, turn on the notifications, click the bell so you can see us when I go live, because YouTube's like, maybe you don't want to watch the people you subscribe to. You have to tell them like 3 times. If you would like to get these broadcasts as podcasts, make sure you subscribe to the Auron MacIntyre Show on your favorite podcast platform. And when you do, leave a rating or review. It really helps with the algorithm magic. Thank you everybody for watching. And as always, I will talk to you next time.